Hi everyone, I'm Chef Jen Franco and I am in my home kitchen in Oakland, California. And today we're going to talk about how to make broth. Broth is a light, flavorful liquid and it's usually made with vegetables. And today we're going to be talking about how to use food scraps and parts of the vegetable that you don't normally eat and make it into a delicious broth. So, I wanted to show you how I set up my station when I'm cooking. I usually have my cutting board here and then I set two bowls next to me. When I'm cutting, say, onions or carrots and I have the tops or the peels, I put all the things that can go into my broth in one bowl and then things that I don't want to go into my broth into a different bowl. We'll talk more about that later. So after I'm finished cooking and I have my full bowl, I put it into a plastic bag or a container and I stick it in the freezer, and that's what we're going to use today. So let me grab it out of the freezer. This is what my full bag of scraps looks like. I wanted to talk about first the kinds of equipment that we need to make a broth. Obviously, you're going to need your vegetables. You need a stock pot or a pot that has some height to it. This is 6 quarts. You're going to need a wooden spoon or something to stir your stock. And then later on, we're going to strain it, and you'll need a pitcher and a colander and then some mason jars or some containers for the broth to go into. So let's look at what's in my bag. Onion skins and pieces of the onion that I couldn't use. I have the stems of parsley. I have the top of an onion. My onion came with a top on it from the farmer's market. I have pieces of the ends of asparagus that are too woody that you wouldn't eat them. I have the top of a turnip. And then there's things like stems of mushrooms. Yeah, you kind of get the hint. I have some skins that are from the garlic, and they're all going to be, oh, this is the top of a green onion. So all of that is going to just go directly into our pot. You want to come look at it? It's all going to squash down a little bit as I put water in it. And it's important that you put room temperature or cold water into your stock. It shouldn't be warm. You don't want it to get murky. And you just want to add enough water so it covers the vegetables. And you're going to see that as we start heating this up and these vegetables start to cook, they're going to kind of sink down. So you don't want to add too much water because you want to make sure that you're getting a lot of the flavors from the vegetables. So the other two things that I'm going to add to this are bay leaves. I'm just adding 2. And then these are black peppercorns. I'm just going to add, I don't know, a little handful, I guess. So there's probably like maybe 12 or 15 peppercorns. And it just gives it a little bit of extra flavor. And then I'm going to turn my stove on. Mine has numbers on it, so I'm going to turn it to a 6. You don't want to bring your stock to a boil. What you're going to want to do is bring it up and then bring it down to a gentle simmer. And I'll show you when we get to that point so you guys can see exactly what it's supposed to look like. So you'll notice that I didn't add any salt to the stock. I prefer not to add salt because depending on what kind of dish that I'm going to make with this actual stock, I want to be able to control it. So if I'm going to make something like a soup and I've used roasted vegetables and those vegetables already have salt on them, then I don't want to add a salted broth that might be make my entire dish too salty. So I save that for when I'm actually making the dish that the broth is going to go into. Let's talk about what we use broth for. I like to use it when I'm cooking rice. So instead of just using water, I'm using the broth, and you're getting additional nutritional value from that. If I'm cooking dried beans, I like to also use broth instead of water. Another thing that you can do with it is deglazing your pan. What does deglazing mean? So if you're making a stir fry or you're sauteing something and you notice that your vegetables or whatever you're cooking are starting to stick a little bit on the pan, you can add a little bit of broth to it, and it's going to help lift that up, and it's going to take some of the flavors that have gotten stuck onto your pan up and into your dish. One of the things that I really like about broth is that you're using the whole vegetable. So you bought an entire onion, you bought an entire carrot, you bought a whole bulb of garlic, you're using the whole thing. So for example, an onion, you're not going to use the skin, you're not going to eat the skins, but you can put it into your broth. So you're basically extracting all of the nutrition out of every single vegetable that you're using before it goes into the compost. It's a good food waste tip. Some of the vegetables that you can use in a broth or stock are carrots, celery, onions, garlic. Like you guys saw, I used the peels from those things. So if you peeled your carrots before you made something, then you can use the peels. You can use potato peels, parsnip peels, and same with garlic. You can use the skins from the garlic, and if you use herbs like parsley or cilantro, after you've removed the leaves from those for whatever you're using it for, you can put those into your stock as well, and it gives it a nice aromatic flavor, which is kind of just like, it brings a freshness to it. Things that you don't want to put in your stock, and the reason that you don't want to put these things in your stock is because they will dominate it. So it'll kind of like take over the flavor. You don't want to add things like leafy greens, broccoli, cauliflower, cabbage, and beets. You definitely don't want to add beets because beets will dye your entire stock red. So just when you're cooking and you have these two bowls, make sure that you're kind of thinking about what could be able to go into your broth and what probably shouldn't. Okay, you can see here it's kind of starting to bubble. Someone once told me that a simmer is like a smile and a boil is like laughing. So if you can kind of think of it that way, that might be helpful to figure out what your stock or your broth should cook at. Okay, and here we see the bubbling. So we're just gonna turn it down a little bit. I said before it was on a 6, now I'm gonna just move it to a 4. And you want to see a little bit of movement, but you don't want it kind of bubbling over. And then we're going to set our timer, and we're going to keep this going for about 45 minutes. Okay, so let's look at this broth. You can see that the vegetables have definitely cooked. Everything is wilted, and it's been about 45 minutes. So I'm gonna, and look at the color, it's a very nice color. I'm gonna just stick my spoon in here, and I'm just looking for like a flavorful stock. It's not gonna like take over, or it's not gonna be overpowering, but it just should have some like flavors of vegetables and be pretty pleasant. So let's see. Okay, did the trick. So we're going to turn off our stove, and then we are going to strain the broth. You want to use a colander or a strainer that has the smallest sized little holes as possible. And this is a little bit of a balancing act, but I feel like when I put it into, or strain it into a pitcher, it's easiest to then put into jars. So I'm just going to be really careful and try and get the majority of the broth in the pitcher. Okay, we'll start there. Look at this color. And then I'm going to just put this into mason jars. Think about the end use of what your broth is going to be used for. So if you're going to just use it in rice or something like that, or a grain, you might want to put it into you know, like 2-cup containers or something a little smaller. So I'm gonna pour it in here, and I'm going to freeze some of this broth. So you wanna make sure that this has a fill line, but you want to, some things tell you, but others don't. You just want to make sure when it's going to cool and go into the freezer, it's going to expand. So you want to leave a little room in the top so the glass doesn't break. I'll fill this guy up too. Same thing, leaving a little bit of space in the top. So I'm just gonna sit these on the counter. I'm gonna let them cool all the way to room temperature. You don't wanna put anything in the refrigerator when it's still warm or hot. Then I'm gonna put lids on these, and I'm not gonna screw them on too tight. And they'll either go into the refrigerator and freezer. And there you have it, you just made your own broth.